So now we're talking for a few minutes about the most famous Imagist poem, Ezra Pound's In a Station of the Metro. So before we find out what happened, what Pound's account of the making of this poem is, what do you see? Max, what do you see?
The petals on the wet black bough remind me of the HD. There seems to be a similar effect where you see something germinating or something colorful or something beautiful among the detritus, among something natural, among growing on something dead.
What's different in this strategy from the HD strategy?
Well, we have people here in this poem.
There are no people in the two HD poems we talked about. So what's the, Molly, if someone were to say to you, oh, you study Pound, what's this poem about? I'm going to use the word about, which I don't think we've used much. Maybe in talking about Whitman a little bit. But.
Well, it's a representation of what he sees in a particular scene, in this urban scene.
Over a course of time?
No, it's a moment.
It's a moment.
It's like an apparition sort of signals like a vision.
Let's talk about apparition, the word apparition, Anna. Go with it. I mean, this is a hard word.
I mean, apparition to me could be, when you think about it, like in the Shakespearean sense of like a ghost appearing, or
Ghostly.
It could be like something just appears. It's kind of like the noun of to appear. It just like.
In that sense of apparition, it's almost an after image.
Sure.
Like ghosts are after images, I guess. That, I've been thinking about this poem for a long time, but you're saying that makes me think for the very first time, for me, that there's an implication of afterthought, even though, as Molly rightly suggests, this is about a moment and it tries to be as present in the moment as it can, but it's almost about a recollection, the apparition of what I saw. If you put your thumb over the apparition of, then you get the pure image, the pure objective thing. We're going to see this in So Much Depends Upon a Wet Red Wheelbarrow glazed with rainwater. Where are the white chickens? Beside the white chickens. The apparition of these faces. What if it was just these faces in the crowd? :
I think we're focused
Would it be better?
on the distinction between the object and the image itself, right? And the image is something we hold in our minds that always has an aura. An aura to it, right? So I think the apparition is hearkening or evoking that sense of aura.
So if there's anything metapoetic here, it's the word apparition in a way. The apparition. I'm now delivering to you the appearance, how it appeared. Dave?
Very much like the HD poems, which both started with the symbolism and the more undefined qualities of the things. This one starts out with that undefined,
But
and then it goes into something more specific.
I'm sorry. I think it's almost like that sudden shift in perception where you're sort of, like if you're looking off into the sky, not really looking, and all of a sudden you see a cloud that's shaped like an elephant, and you have that moment where the image just sort of freezes and turns into something else.
It's a moment of recognition, essentially.
Yeah.
He sees something, these faces, I think, that word these sets the faces apart from the crowd, of course, and it suggests that there's something familiar or something almost expected or something almost sought after in those faces as opposed to the rest of the faces.
Allie, I think you mentioned people. Who mentioned that there are people? Max did, but I still want to go to Allie on this.
Sorry, Max.
There are people in the poem, but barely these faces in the. It's like the person who comes to town every once in a while is Bruce Springsteen, and he says, "Philadelphia, it's good to see familiar faces." He's not really talking about me. And he's almost, I love Bruce, but he's almost not talking about individual people. He's talking about the faces that he sees. Am I pushing this too far? Is there a little bit of dehumanization in the faces, rendering the faces in the crowd?
I think so. The face isn't a person in, its totality. It's also, but I do think it's interesting that a face is often, almost always kind of the defining, identification marker of a person. It's a face. Someone is really the primary thing you use to distinguish different people.
It's not like the apparition of these noses in the crowd,
Right.
you know? Like,
Let's not get into noses again.
I think in is important too. It seems like it's these faces out of all the other faces rather than,
These
the
particular
faces of the crowd.
But what he's trying to do is figure out later, Amaris in a minute will tell us a little bit of the story of the making of this poem, but he's trying to figure out what to do visually using visual words that are visual-like in the Imagist mode. This is very early Imagism, and it's classic Imagism as we see it now. He's trying to figure out what to do with them. And so you have to I'm going to use that word dehumanize again, you have to render or reduce the individual subjectivities and intelligences of the individuals in a crowd. Of course, you have to do that with a crowd anyway. And then pin them down to something that's very static and natural and visual. So nothing wrong with that. It's just that it's something that needs to be observed. So he really worked hard at this. Amaris, what do you remember of the story of the composition of this?
Well, three years after the writing of this poem, he narrates how one day when he was, after disembarking from a metro in Paris, he saw a woman's face in the crowd, and then after the woman's face, the child's face, and he was so struck and overwhelmed by the beauty of those faces that for a while he didn't know how to render them with exactitude, and only afterwards, after contemplating it for a while, he settled upon a formulation or what he calls, I think, was it a formula or a calculation?
Pattern.
Yes.
If by pattern you mean not if by pattern you mean something with a repeat, but splotches of color.
And so he came up with this equation of petals on a wet black bough to give some sort of distinction to those faces.
In radical condensation, apparently he wrote many, many lines, and in the end came up with these two. This is, I mean, if you write and I'm wrong about this fact, I think it was a 30-line or a 90-line poem or whatever it is, a couple of pages that he wrote, and then bring it down to two. I mean, has anybody ever had the experience of radical condensation to that degree?
maybe Niediger.
Well, anybody, yes, the condenser. He should hang out at the condenser. He'd be very productive. This is really radical condensation. I think we need to just respect the fact of its condensation. Okay, finally then let's talk about the juxtaposition. Pound describes this poem as an effort in the language of exploration. He's exploring language as he composes. Right, this is a language of exploration. He's exploring the way reality can be rendered in words as he goes along. And he's trying to avoid any ornament at all, but he's creating a juxtaposition which he calls a superposition. Dave, can you tell us just generally how that works? Generally, when you take one thing and put it next to another?
Well, it's different from taking two different things and comparing them. Here he's taking one thing, focusing on it harshly, and trying to describe it in a different way. In that way I view it not as a comparison, but sort of as a palimpsest, where he stays
one thing on the other.
Yes.
So juxtaposition generally unleashes many interpretations. It opens things out. Yet imagism is supposed to be about being so precise that the meaning is delivered precisely, exactly. This anticipates what's going to be very important in poetics as we move through this course, namely juxtaposition. When we get to the language poets, for instance, someone like Ron Silliman uses what he calls the new sentence to create, through parataxis, one thing after another that doesn't add up, that doesn't have a cause and effect or sequential relationship. So in a way, Pound both evinces imagism perfectly in at least proposing a very precise rendering, but he also, through juxtaposition, opens it up to wide interpretation. So why don't we conclude with one or two of you trying to interpret the juxtaposition. So we have faces in a crowd in a metro station, and we have wet black petals on a branch. Okay, how do they work together?
The petals are wet and black. I think.
I'm sorry, the bow is wet. Thank you.
The bow is wet and
That's
black.
the first time I've ever been wrong.
It's like little pink circles on a black background. So I think
Which I think, yes, I think it's like the
So it's really
apparition
painterly.
The apparition of the faces is kind of like he's like seeing these spots of like beauty, like Amaris is telling us. set against this wet black bow, so they're actually very.
So
they're
you're
very-
doing the images thing of delivering what precisely it means. I'm inviting you, and maybe it can't be done. Maybe this does resist opening up. But how do you? What does juxtaposition create? What kind of meanings does it create, Amaris?
Well, it creates a metaphor here, and perhaps that's the meaning of the exactitude of imagism. It's not settling on the specific traits or feature of the image or the object itself. He was trying to figure out how to convey his impression of that image, and that was only possible through this cross-section that he creates in the poem.
Let's conclude by asking Emily. Hi, Emily. When I first read this poem and was taught it in college, I was excited. I just thought, oh, this is really changing my world. How do you react to it? Do you like it?
Not especially. I guess I just don't buy imagism as a practice to begin with. Mostly because here the apparition of these faces, the people who are actually sort of like the core and like the referent of this poem are more tenuous than the image that is used to describe them. He displaces the realness and the reality of this poem from its actual content to the metaphor which is supposed to capture it. And maybe that's intentional. Maybe all we really can claim from our own like sensory experience is our own very subjective perception of it. But I just think it falls apart when people are apparitions and the actual apparition, which is our impression of them, become concrete and static. And
Well, there you go. A perfect way to end. Emily Harnett versus Ezra Pound. Definitely equal opponents.